You are just joining us on Facebook Live. I am Lauren Van Hamert from RDU on Stage, and I am so excited about this one, but I am here chatting with Pulitzer Prize winner Doug Wright, an amazing playwright, and someone who moderated a discussion at our conference. That's where I met you, the American Theater Critic Association conference last November. You moderated a wonderful panel, and I took a picture with you afterwards, and the response was so great. I just said, I have to have him on my podcast.
Oh, great. That's so great. I'm so flattered.
Well, we love your work here in North Carolina. We love I Am My Own Life.
I'm happy about that.
It gets produced a lot here.
That's fantastic.
But before we get into your work specifically, I want to kind of start at your beginning. I read that you may have written your first play, The Devil's Playground, at 11 years old.
Yeah, I was about 11 years old, and my mother, who was a very inspirational figure, she knew that I wanted it to look like a professional script, so she typed it on my behalf, which was a labor of love because it was about 200 hand-scrawled pages. And she made it look so professional by typing it on her old Selectrix typewriter.
So did you know at 11 that you wanted to be a writer? Or I know you were like the president of the thespian club in high school. So,
or deep.
Yeah, I do my homework, but did you want to ever go into performing, or was it always the writing?
You know, like so many of us, I think, in the field, and I hope your listeners relate, I wanted to make theater, and I wanted to make it urgently and passionately. And so as a kid growing up and on into early adulthood, I would paint scenery, I would act in plays, I would direct plays. But there came a certain moment, maybe it was because of graduate school, where you had to check a box and commit to a single discipline. Mm-hmm. And I think it was kind of a cold appraisal on my part. I said, to act, you have to have a role. To direct, you need a producer and a really good play and a venue. And to write theater, you just need a paper and a pen, and you can start immediately. You don't have to wait for anyone to give you permission to practice a craft that you love. So rather than, hit the pavement and audition or beg for a play as an unproven talent, I thought, I'll just write something and see if that opens doors. So it was a kind of a calculated choice, I guess, on my part.
I love that, though. You went to Yale and then got your MFA from NYU, where you were a student of Terrence McNally's.
Yes.
We lost him to this horrible virus last March, or in March. Can you talk to me about him and your relationship with him and the legacy that he leaves to all of us?
I'm so glad, Lauren, that you asked about him, because he was probably the most inspiring professor I had at NYU, because the theater was in his blood. He was a complete creature of the art form. And he was adamant with students, at times very, very difficult. And he would challenge students line by line on the text they bring in to read in class. But it always came from a place of passion about the work and about setting a bar. And then subsequently, he would come to see my plays. And even when he couldn't attend, he would ask to read them, which I was deeply flattered by. And so he stayed a mentor for me right up until we served together on the Dramatists Guild Council. And he was much beloved within this community. And I think it almost took until the moment he died for us all to collectively realize what a titanic presence he was in the American theater. And a deeply good-humored man. a principled man, a man who not only did remarkable things theatrically, but his plays so often address social issues. And I think if you want to look at gay life in 20th century American culture, we'll go back and we'll look at the oeuvre of Terrence McNally, because he covered almost every aspect of that experience in his work. So he was both a brilliant artist, but also just a really forward-thinking human being. And I think we all miss him, to be sure.
It's a deep loss. It's one of the last shows I saw, well, in December, was right after our conference, was Ragtime. And it was the first time I had seen it, and just brilliant writing, brilliant storytelling. He said he said about you in an article, that you are meticulous and tenacious about your revisions on your scripts, and you're even one of those artists that believes, even at that young age, that God is in the details. So what were some of the lessons that you learned from him, that you took away from him as a young person starting your career?
Oh gosh, well, if any of that's true, that he so generously said, then it's because those are the things he taught me to be. I know that I'll never forget one class where a student had brought in a play and they were describing the set, and they said that center stage there was an archway. And Terrence started to engage the student and wanted to know what kind of archway. Was it a metal archway? Was it a stone archway? Did it have Corinthian columns? Did it have egg and dart design? He wanted to know everything about its substance and its architecture. And the student clearly hadn't considered these options. And Terrence got angry and he said, you know, it's your play. You have one arch on stage of all the arches in the history of architecture. You can only choose one to drive home the implicit point of your play, and it's got to be the right arch. So if God is in the details, that's a very definitely a lesson that Terrence taught. He really thought writers should be as unerringly specific as they can, because you've only got so many pages to fill. So you better be very selective about what you include and very specific.
What I love about plays, his plays, yours plays, is the language. It's almost this beautiful rhythmically written work, in the language of the plays. What I'm wondering is, how important do those details become when you start writing for audio drama? Because one of your last projects was this audio drama, Fake News. So when you strip away the arch in the middle of the stage, or you strip away sets, costumes, lights, all the visuals that we rely on when we're telling a story in the theater, as a writer, when you strip that away, do those details become even more important when writing for audio drama?
I think they probably do. I know I was really gifted in a production of Fake News that Playing on Air did. They cast it so brilliantly with actors who have really rich, really recognizable voices, who brought incredible nuance to the words that I gave them. But it's fun because one thing that distinguishes TV from, theater from TV or film is that the theater artists create something on stage that's patently artificial, but the audience suspends its disbelief, and the artist and the audience come together to kind of complete the gesture. Like if somebody walks on stage with a sign that says, you know, Poland 1935, and there's nothing else to be seen, the whole audience will go, okay, Poland 1935, we're there. And they'll suspend their sense of what is literal, and they'll enter a metaphoric space, and they'll oftentimes complete the picture on your behalf. So that happens in the theater, and arguably in radio drama, it just happens to a greater degree. So you're asking the audience to be your co-conspirator in completing the work even more aggressively than you do when you're writing a play, because in a play you're going to have actors with certain physiognomy, you're going to be in certain costumes, and with a radio play you're saying, not only pretend there's a fourth wall, but imagine what every one of these people looks like and moves like. And so you want to give little signifiers in the text that point an audience in the right direction.
I love that. Co-conspirators. I've heard of them as collaborators, but I like co-conspirators so much
More
better.
fun. Totally, totally.
I think maybe you've written a lot of plays and you wrote plays prior to Quills, but Quills is probably the first one that people can point to
I think so.
and say, oh, yeah, that was the first. It wasn't actually the first, but it might be the first that people may know. And that premiered off Broadway in 1995. It's interesting to me, the trend in theater to bring movies and adapt them for the stage. You adapted your stage play for a film. So talk to me about that process and the challenge of taking your work and adapting it for a different medium.
I was really fortunate that I was included in that process, because so often when a studio will buy the rights to a play, the first thing they do is liberate the writer, so to speak. And fortunately, they asked me to do the adaptation, and then they stuck with me over multiple drafts. And the director and I even hit it off in such a way that I was a welcome presence on the set, which is also quite rare in film. So I was very lucky. And I think in a way it has something to do with what I was suggesting before. The play is acted in a kind of grand hyperbolic style with a lot of lurid stories. There are acts of real violence in the play, but they're symbolic acts. Like, I don't think any of us go to the theater and see a character in Extremis who's maybe losing their hands at the cruel mandate of, a tyrant. And none of us worry for the actor's safety. We know that it's a play. We know that losing their hands is a kind of metaphorical moment in the play. And even if it's done with great gusto and theatricality and verisimilitude, we still know it's in the context of this fantasy that we're engaging in. Film is a really, really literal medium. And if someone loses their hands in a movie, you don't think about what it means metaphorically. You think, oh my God, somebody lost their hand. And it is a violent act, and it is a painful act, and it is a wholly sensory and non-intellectual experience when you watch it happen. So we had to mediate the kind of comic, exaggerated violence of the play so that it would be palatable enough that audiences could understand that the movie was a metaphor about freedom of expression and what it means to silence an artist. And so we scaled back the violence in the play enormously, but it was really so we could land the same thematic points, not because we wanted to soft sell the film subject, which was the notorious pornographer, the Marquis de Sade. We wanted to live up to his diabolical nature in the movie. So we didn't want to be kittenish about it at all. But in the same breath, we knew if it was too extreme, all of the intellectual content of the play would be lost in service of sensationalism. So it was a fascinating process to turn it from one to the other.
Was that your first film?
It was, yes.
So, I mean, talk about a stellar cast.
I know, I've been spoiled forever. Working with that cast will just always be one of the great highlights of my creative life.
Wow. You aimed high for the first.
Yeah. I remember it was the last day that Michael Caine was shooting. And I was so moved that he was in the film because he's such a huge figure in both British and American film history. And so I went up to him and I gave him a big hug, and my eyes filled with tears. And I said, Michael, thank you so much for being in my very first movie. And without missing a beat, he said, well, thank you for writing my 110th.
Oh, no, yeah. And I imagine there's that moment when you're seeing your words being portrayed by these icons of cinema, Kate Winslet, Michael Caine. I mean, it must be a very strange experience to
Well,
see.
sometimes when you're not hearing them say your words, and by that I mean, I'll never forget being called to Kate Winslet's trailer one morning, and she was in makeup, and she had a question, and it was about a specific line in the screenplay, and I regrettably I don't remember what the line was, but she said, "I would never say anything against your words, but I understand the content of this line, but I think I can communicate the thought more clearly with my eyes. I'd rather not say anything in this moment." And of
Mhm.
course, we got on the set and she did just that, and it was wonderfully impactful. So that kind of collaboration with actors of that caliber is just exhilarating.
Now, talk to me about the other way, going from movie to stage adaptation. You did that with Little Mermaid. I
Uh-huh.
talk about another beloved, very different story.
Uh-huh.
um, but what, I mean, taking a beloved Disney animated film and then translating underwater for the stage, that was almost unheard of. So what are the challenges of that process of bringing the film, especially a film like that sticks out in so many people's minds and hearts, to the stage?
It's such a beloved property. And certainly when you accept a job with the Walt Disney Company, you know that they're not asking you to reinvent the wheel. They really want you to realize a story that has already proven its worth in the culture and that has impacted, almost every child in this country. Everyone sees The Little Mermaid. And so it's a little bit, you feel like at times like the responsibility is like adapting the Bible. Like if you get it wrong, you're going to upset a lot of people. And so I remember that to have Alan Menken in the room was such a gift because, of course, he forged the original movie with Howard Ashman. So he was the kind of moral conscience of the project. And he could always say, well, the point that Alan hoped to land, or the reason Howard hoped to land, or the reason that Howard gave Ariel this beat with her father is because, in the last scene, it's going to pay off in this way. So Alan brought such rich history to the project. Whenever we questioned the direction we were taking, we could always turn to Alan and almost tell in his face if we were going down the right path or not. And so that was a great gift. And I also think, and I say this delicately, but I think it's also very dangerous to condescend to the material. And if you think, oh my God, it's a Disney animated film. I'm going to step down from my high perch in the world of arts and letters and indulge in this and turn a quick buck. I think you're inevitably going to fail, because I think whenever you agree to adapt something, one thing that is primary is that you have a genuine love of the material, and that it be something that speaks to your head and heart in a way so that you can comfortably live with it for the 3 to 5 years it's going to take to bring it to fruition. And
Mhm.
I'll never forget, as an adult who does not have children in his life, I had no reason to go see The Little Mermaid. But one day, at the video store back in the 90s, I plucked it from the shelf and said, I'm just going to check this out. And I took it home and I was enchanted. And I thought it was one of the most vibrant and thrilling theatrical scores that I'd heard in a really long time. And it felt like the musical was being rebirthed in a new form.
Mhm.
And I'd always loved Little Shop of Horrors. And so I actually went to Disney and asked if I could do the gig, because I really care deeply about the material. And I think that's important. I think anytime you agree to adapt something, you should hope to realize it, not make it better. That comes from a place of arrogance that I think is dangerous.
Mm. And what's interesting about The Little Mermaid is my daughter, she was too young to see the movie. She never saw the movie when it came out. She wasn't even born when it came out. But we had gone to see the stage play here on tour, and it occurred to me, this is her first entry into this piece, this
Wow.
Little Mermaid. It was like for a whole new generation, the show. I felt like the musical was.
Oh, that's great to hear. I hope that's true.
I don't know, but for my family it was, because she had not seen it before. It was new for her, and it was exciting. And it was like, no, this is really old. I saw this in college, but
That's amazing.
for her it wasn't. So
Yeah. Oh, that's thrilling.
um I a few years after the movie version of Quills came out, and again, there's a couple plays in between Quills and I Am My Own Wife, but I really do want to get to I Am My Own Wife. Um, you, I Am My Own Wife opened off Broadway and then moved onto Broadway. You won the Tony Award. You won a small other prize for it,
A
Pulitzer
little
Prize.
paperweight. It's a beautiful little paperweight.
um, so and this play, I told you before we went on camera, this in the last few seasons here in the Triangle, this play has been done a lot, from readings to full productions. Last year Theatre Raleigh did a beautiful production of it. So talk to me about your relationship with Charlotta.
Oh, it's amazing because it continues to this day because so many brave uh, performers, adopt her guise and take on the role. So I feel like I'm still encountering her almost daily, and it's so funny because the relationship was so special, and I felt so privileged to get to know her. And at the same time, I know that she had a lot of acolytes. She was a real figure in German culture at a very tender moment, at the moment of German reunification. And so I was just one of a series of admiring young gay men who came to sort of sit at her knee and lap up her wisdom. And it became a very close friendship. And I still have the letters we exchanged and photographs from my many visits. And I still wish desperately that I could tell her about the play's success. And in fact, the museum that she founded was slated for closure by the arts ministry in Berlin. But because of the play being performed internationally, the rise in attendance by tour groups became so significant that instead of closing the museum, the arts committee awarded it 10 million euros to stay in operation. So that was really moving to me. I felt like the play gave back in a way by keeping her legacy alive. And now the play is having a kind of second breath, if you will. And I think it's because of the rise in awareness of the challenges faced by the trans community in our culture and their own increasing political presence and the way in which they're ferociously and bravely advocating for themselves in the media and elsewhere. And so I think in Charlotta, they have found a long overdue champion. And so that community has embraced her. A friend just recently told me that the play is read in classes about sexuality and gender almost as often as it's read in theater classes. And I just find that so gratifying that this community that's sort of been denied a history and denied an identity is finding validation through her story. So it's been really incredible to see the play continue. It's almost every night since it opened on Broadway, it's been performed somewhere in the world, and that just means so much to me.
I read an article in which you talk about obsessions and how being a playwright, you have to be a little obsessed. So when did your obsession with Charlotta begin? When did you first discover her? Why did you reach out to her in the first place?
Oh, well, it was largely as depicted in the play. A very dear childhood friend of mine had taken a post as the foreign desk reporter for US News and World Report, and he was stationed in Berlin. And the wall fell, and the local German press found out about Charlotta, and they started to do stories on this fascinating maverick individual who was able to survive both the Nazis and the communists as her word was transvestite. That word transvestite has fallen out of favor now, but it's the word she used at the time. And so he saw these clippings and went out and saw the museum. And he was so overwhelmed that he wrote me a letter and he said, come visit me in Berlin. I found the subject for your next play. And I took him up on the offer, and I went out to meet her, and she gave me a private tour of the museum, and she invited me for tea afterwards. And we had tea together in her home. And I remember at the time just saying, I have to write a play about you. You're too extraordinary to me. And that began 2 years of visiting her continuously every other month or so to gather the 500 pages of transcript to write the play.
Mm. And clearly she was really special to you. You could see when you talk about her.
She's like the grandmother. I mean, I had two wonderful grandmothers, but as a gay man, oftentimes so many gay people are raised in straight families. And so you don't have a role model or a point of identification. And so Charlotta always felt like the truest possible grandmother I could have. And I just loved her fiercely.
So she isn't the only real person you've written about. Quills recounts the final days, you talked about it, the final days in the life of Marquis de Sade. Grey Gardens explores the Edith Ewing Bouvier-Beale and Edith Bouvier-Beale. How challenging is it to write characters based on real people? And as a playwright, how do you figure out where you can take those artistic liberties to make those stories, whether it's Grey Gardens or Marquis de Sade, how do you make those marketable to an audience? Where do those artistic liberties come from?
Yeah, I think it's a really delicate question. And I will say that my criteria in terms of how much do I have to adhere to the truth versus how much can I take creative liberty and invent almost changes project to project. And by that, I mean the story of the Marquis de Sade. He's one of the most written about figures in Western culture. And there are probably 15 to 20 really great biographies about him on the market, as well as all kinds of academic research. And there are scholars at universities all across Europe and all across the United States for whom the Sade is their full-time specialty. So I felt in writing about the Marquis de Sade, I could take a lot of liberties because there were plenty of people out there on the record who were willing to correct me. And also, I was working within an established literary tradition. The playwright Peter Weiss, who wrote Marat Sade, and the Japanese playwright Yukio Mishima, who wrote Madame de Sade, had also plucked the character from history and put him in a fictional narrative of their own design. So I felt like I wasn't the first writer to do that. So Quills is a kind of fantastical fable that is as much based on his fiction as it is on the facts of his life. And it takes a million liberties. And I can do it comfortably knowing that anyone who's truly curious can go to the library and read. Charlotte von Malsdorf, I knew, was a character I would be introducing to certainly the American public, and that she would be exotic and unusual and unheard of. But I felt it was really important that her story was true. And there was no one to correct the record. There are no scholars who specialize in her. There are no definitive biographies, and even her autobiography isn't reliable. So I knew in crafting her life, I couldn't afford to take liberties. And so it varies from project to project. Writers always say, you're looking not for the facts, but for the truth. But I think that's relative. I think it depends on the subject you're addressing.
Mm. And have there been plays that you've written? You did this wonderful panel at the Theater Critics Association last November. and you're always a part of that conference. It's not just one and done. So you're always there in some capacity. Has there ever been a play that you've written that you're just obsessed with, you just love, and the critics just don't get it, or they don't respond in the way that you hope they would?
Oh, of course. I think every playwright has felt that way. It's only natural. I always say the terrible truth is, critics and writers, they're two communities in love with the same art form. They have so much in common. And they also have the same goal, which is to promote great theater, one group by writing it and the other by covering it. And so there are two communities that should interact, I think, a lot more than they do. But the trouble with playwrights, and I say this in full disclosure, it takes incredible arrogance to say, okay, I want to talk about a chosen subject for 2 hours, and everybody has to sit quietly in a seat and listen to me talk and pay, $100 for the privilege. And I'll do it through characters and I'll give you a set, but I want you to hear me out for the next 2 hours. In addition to that, there is nothing that makes you more vulnerable than carving out a piece of your heart and holding it up for public consumption. And in a way, every time you write a play, you're saying, I've seen this in the world and I think this might be true. Have you felt this way? Have you had this experience? Do you think I'm on to some elemental truth that unites one human being to the next? And if the audience responds and says yes, as a writer, you feel affirmed as a member of the human sphere. So on the one hand, you're incredibly arrogant and want people to pay for the privilege of hearing you speak. And on the other hand, you're this vulnerable little puppy with your heart on a plate saying, please love me. So what critic can gratify a writer who's vacillating between those two poles of experience? You're either dealing with the most vulnerable person you've ever encountered or the most egomaniacal. So no review can wholly gratify an author, and it has to do not with the critic, but with the author's own nature. And I know when I wrote my play about Ibsen, my play Posterity, which we did at the Atlantic Theater Company, I was devastated because I thought in some sense it was my best play, and friends had told me that. And it was also a very personal play because it was in many ways a tribute to my father, who passed away while I was writing it. And so I was pouring a lot of my grief and ambivalence and love for him into the play, which again is, wholly personal and outside criticism. But I know that Ibsen was a really irascible character, and Ibsen had real trouble with reviewers. And he had some hilarious riposte he used to say about critics, and I let him say them in the play. And most of them were direct Ibsen quotes, but a lot of the critics came after me for insulting their profession. And so that was devastating, in part because it was true to Ibsen's nature, and the very lines they objected to were actual, Ibsen quotes. And I thought the play had a larger, more balanced view of the relationship between art and criticism than that single character did within the play. But that was a play that, had no impact in the world and has had very few subsequent productions. And I think it's going to require an exciting young director who has some thrilling new take on it and sees something in it that others haven't for it to have any kind of future. But that's also, that's the nature of the beast. That's what you sign up for. I think it's sometimes more shocking when a play is a success than when it fails. But that's just, it's the nature of what we do, and we don't have to do it. We put ourselves in the hot seat. So you have to live with it.
When you write a play, so one of the critics here, he and I were chatting when I first started writing theater criticism, and I said, I never feel like I'm done with my criticism. I never feel like my articles are finished. I could literally work on them a month, months and months, and long after the play is closed. And he said, my darling, good criticism is never finished. It's just abandoned. So, are your plays ever finished, or when do you kind of know it's time to abandon them and put them out into the world?
Yeah, I think your friend is very wise. And I say it a little bit differently, but I think I'm hinting at the same truth. I often tell students there are no perfect plays, but there are many finished plays. And I do think one thing that separates the adults from the children in this field is the ability to rewrite, because I know so many promising young writers that'll do a first draft and think it's finished. And I do think if you've been doing this for a while, you know, it's 10 or 12 drafts before it's going to get published. And if you don't have that passion for the subject, and if it can't carry your interest through 12 drafts, why should it carry an audience's interest through 120 minutes? So I think that's a big factor. But I often think we write from a subconscious place to resolve unanswered questions in our lives. And I think when we feel like those questions have been in some way addressed or resolved or nourished, we need to put that play down and move on.
Mm. Somebody posted on Facebook a question. Matthew, he's one of our local theater makers. He said that you had contacted him after you saw a funny promo video of his theater company's production of Stonewater Rapture.
Uh-huh.
Was so touched that you had reached out to him, and I guess you guys met up and spoke when he was out in LA. And I guess this brings up a point. I mean, you're president of the Dramatists Guild, you work with playwrights all over the country. Truth of fact, most people aren't going to make it to off Broadway or Broadway like you have. They're going to see their work realized in regional theaters or on regional stages, community theaters around the country. At least that's where something might even be workshopped or developed before it moves on to bigger stages.
Mhm.
So why is it important for you as a scholar, as a teacher, as a playwright to support local artists wherever local may be for them?
Well, in a way, the answer is in your own well-posed question. And I think it's because that's where the majority of our work happens, is out in the world with people doing it. And I learned one interesting lesson through I Am My Own Wife. There were companies that would do it in Texas or Michigan or Wyoming, and they would import a New York actor to play the part. And oftentimes they were stunning productions with absolutely extraordinary actors, don't get me wrong. But there were also companies in cities and states across America who would cast their beloved local actor in the role, someone that they'd seen do everything from, you know, Christorang to Moliere to Shakespeare again and again in their own communities. And they would cast this individual in this one-person show to let them truly unpack their arsenal, everything they could do as an actor in 2 hours. And the degree of goodwill that came in the door from the audience, because that was one of their own, was profound. And that person could oftentimes be every bit as good as the New York actor, sometimes better than the New York actor, and sometimes not as good. But that didn't matter. What mattered is that they already had the goodwill of the audience. And that to me became preferable to importing anybody. And I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen with the Ladies of Grey Gardens. Like, cast the 2 best singing actresses in your community and you'll get a return. And, you know, it's a living form, and it's made by people for people. And so you've got to stay engaged with the people that are making your work.
And is that part of, your audience is your co-conspirators or your collaborators, as you said towards the beginning?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And it's also, it's a way to really assess if your work is making its mark, because Broadway is a very rarefied particular slice of theater making in this country. And even New York nonprofit theater is highly specific. And it doesn't represent the multitude of places where really important theater is happening. A good play can change a life in Austin, Texas, as readily as it can change a life on, Broadway and 47th Street. And that's what you want your plays to do.
Absolutely. For us, the local actor, the beloved local actor who's played everything, he's watching on Facebook. His name is David Henderson. He's played everything from Jacob Marley to your classic Shakespeare characters. And he did play Charlotta in the full production that was last year. And he said that he was amazed at the things lurking around the corners of the show and running into them on a nightly basis that surprised him and kept him honest. He said the show's a gift to an actor, and he was honored to be able to tell the story.
Oh, thank you, David. I'm sorry I didn't get to see your performance. It sounds remarkable.
He's brilliant. I'll have to send you the set for that production was so beautiful. I'll have to send you.
Oh, I'd love to see. Absolutely.
All right, David, I'm sending him a picture. I should have put it up on, to share it on my screen to share with you. Another question that came from Facebook, and this was a question I have too. In speaking to local playwrights and local theater makers, this pandemic is so unprecedented, but we all know playwrights are storytellers, and they're going to write stories about this moment in history. So do you see any trends that are going to come out of this pandemic experience? Are we going to see a slew of pandemic plays? What are going to be the themes that we see moving forward?
Gosh, it's such a great question, and I wish I had a crystal ball because I don't know. And I feel like to write about the current moment is almost impossible because you need a little distance in order to frame it with the right kind of perspective. So I don't know that I can answer your question, but what I can say is I'm extremely fortunate because I have a number of commissions and projects that were in place before the pandemic hit, and I'm still expected to deliver those drafts. So I have work to do every day, which is a real blessing. The flip side of that is I look, and they're all wonderful projects and projects I would do again in a heartbeat. But what seemed really urgent to impart to the world, 10 weeks ago, and what feels urgent now are really different. And I'm writing a play about a forgotten American humorist, a wonderful man named Oscar Levant. And he really walked a thin line between personal pain and explosive humor. So he teaches us a lot about the nexus of pain and humor. And that's important to me, and that's fascinating, and it's a big part of our culture, and you see it in everyone from Jerry Lewis to Robin Williams. And to me, it's incredibly relevant and worth exploring. It feels smaller now in the face of a global pandemic, but I have to wake up every day and say, I'm still committed to this play, I'm still committed to its subject, and I still believe it's a subject that's worth theatrical examination. And that's the trouble I'm having at the moment, is looking at the work I'm currently doing through the lens of the pandemic and asking myself, will the world still need this play? And I think a lot of writers are feeling that.
We will still need your plays, Doug.
Oh, well, that's very kind. That's very generous.
I'm telling you, as a theater, we will still need your stories.
That's very, very kind.
Obviously, you spent many hours interviewing Charlotta, but if you could have an imaginary dinner or dinner party with any of the characters that you've written about, or that you've written on page, who would that be?
Oh, that is such an amazing question. I would say the Marquis de Sade, but I'm not sure I'd survive the meal. So we'll take him off the plate. For the sheer lunatic brio of it, I might say little Edie, because she'd be a lively dining companion. But my gosh, that is such a great question. I think this is an obscure, random choice, but it popped into my mind. So Marcel Duchamp, the French surrealist and Dadaist, I've always been fascinated by him and had a kind of lifelong love affair with his work. So I might want to sit down with Marcel Duchamp.
I love that. And what advice would you have? We have so many aspiring playwrights and people writing in this area. I'll be hosting, helping host Sips and Scripts, which is a local group that meets monthly to develop new work and allow playwrights to hear their words being read. Um, what advice would you have for playwrights starting out? What advice would you have for your 11-year-old self writing your first play?
Totally. This may almost be a cliche, I hope not, but it's dangerous to write to a perceived marketplace. It's dangerous to say, well, that play was a success, I'll write one like it. Or, well, these are the properties of commercially successful play, so I'll write a play that has those properties. No, 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 you're just chasing your tail. What you have to do is carve out a piece of yourself, something you've seen in the world that has felt entirely true to you, and try and impart it with all the clarity and compassion that you can, because what people want to see on the page isn't what they've seen before. They want to hear a thrilling new voice, and your own authorial voice, if you can really hone it and pay attention to it and listen to it through all the distraction and all the fog, is as distinctive and as original as your own DNA. And it's being true to that voice that will bring the play some measure of success, not because of the plays that were on last season or the plays that have moved you the most. It all has to do with, first, rigorous self-examination, then an examination of the world, and then funneling that through craft to impart it in a meaningful way to an audience.
Do you have a favorite play that you've written?
Oh my gosh. I think in order to keep writing, the favorite play has to almost always be the one you're in the middle of, because otherwise you'd probably just give up, you'd sate the appetite and go do something else. So I think it, by necessity, has to be the one that's in front of you.
And you've written a lot of books for musicals, beloved musicals. Grey Gardens is a beautiful score. Little Mermaid, like we were talking about, beautiful score. War Paint is,
War Paint.
Oh my gosh. If
That
you
was so much fun.
powerhouse perform, I mean, talk about two powerhouse actors.
Oh, they're incredible. I mean, just growing up on that Evita album, I'll never forget, I was exhausted. We were in tech with War Paint, and I was on the third mezzanine, and I just lay down on the floor. I was so exhausted. But Patty was doing her 11 o'clock number on the stage downstairs, and all of a sudden I got chills all over my whole body. And I was like, that voice is saying my words. I'll never forget that. She was just, and of course, I have a wonderful and rich history with Christine. She's made wonderful events out of two of my musicals, so I'm grateful to her too. But that Miss Lapone, that clarion voice ringing all the way up to the third mezzanine, I'll never forget it.
Well, and do you have those starstruck moments where you hear somebody like that, or like a Kate Winslet, or like Christina Ebersole, these iconic people in the theater and on stage and film, when you hear them saying your words, do you have that moment that, wait a minute, I wrote that, this is my life? Do you have those, Doug, right?
You working with people, it's funny. I have found, because, you know, we always, at some point, part of us stays lodged in childhood. And I'm always like this geeky guy from Dallas, Texas, and I carry that with me every day. So the sheer proximity to celebrities and the regular way in which you're expected to meet with them and chat with them, you learn over time how to, in a surface way, keep your cool so they're not scared of you. But underneath it, there's always, oh my God, it's you. And I hope I never lose that. I mean, there's a point at which you have to do the work. And so you have to put aside all of those associations of someone's fame or renowned nature, because you've got to get in the pool together and swim. So at some point that kind of starstruck stuff isn't useful, but I hope I always have it, because it's one of the great pleasures of our field is meeting your heroes.
Well, and it's that wonder. It's, Lauren Gunderson, when I interviewed her, she talked about the wonder of it. And
Uh-huh.
that's why we all love this medium so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. These people that just give voice and physicality to our dreams. I mean, how can you not idolize them?
Mm, I love that. Well, we're nearing the end of our hour. I want to thank you so much for joining me. I want to tell everybody that I did share a Spotify playlist of the musicals. I can't share a Spotify playlist of the plays, but the musicals are on my Spotify playlist: War Paint, Little Mermaid, Grey Gardens. I encourage you to listen to those. They're such wonderful, all of them, shows, and very distinctive, all of them.
Oh, that's great to hear. Well, it's been a real pleasure, Lauren, and thank you for digging deep into the archives and having so many great questions. I appreciate it.
Well, I like to make somebody feel like their time is meaningful spent with me and that I've done my homework. So thank you for spending this hour with me. And I hope to see you at a conference soon. I hope we'll all be able to gather in New York in November like we always do. And I hope to see you again and elbow, whatever the
Absolutely. And all the best wishes for everyone's safety and health. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. And I will see you soon. Stay safe and healthy. And I can't wait to see what's next for you.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
I'm going to tell everybody, come back tonight at 7 o'clock. Susanna Huff will be interviewing Terry Dollar, talk about casting and that side of the business. So thank you again, Doug.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.